All right, we're back. We are WEBD6201 in the winter 2020 semester, and this is lesson 1, part 2, here at Durham College. And where last we left off, I'm just going to bring up what we were talking about last time, kind of introduce myself. I talked about the different things we were doing. We did a couple of things from a tool setup perspective. We set up Visual Studio Code. We talked about Git and GitHub, and we set up Git locally, and I also got you guys to sign up to GitHub. So if you haven't had a chance to sign up to GitHub, sign up now. Awesome. We also downloaded and installed Node.js, which is the backend that we talked about last week, or last day. And today we're going to start off with something called progressive enhancement. So that's where I'm going to hit now. So what is progressive enhancement? Well, at the end of the day, a lot of times when we talk about web content, like it says here, content is king. Without content, who cares about JavaScript? Who cares about HTML? Who cares about any of that stuff? A lot of times I've been invited to make a website for somebody, and they said, can you make a website for me? And I'm like, sure, give me your stuff. And they're like, what stuff? And I'm like, I don't know, like things about your company, and maybe some images. Oh, we don't have any of that. And what I tell them is, I'm not a copywriter, I don't make content, I don't take pictures, it's not what I do. I mean, I could, but I'd rather get someone who's a professional to take pictures, and all that kind of stuff. And if it's a greenfield project, a brand new website or something like that, then the answer is, you need to give me your stuff, your content. A lot of times, most of the times, it's not like that actually. It's like they already have a website or a web app, and they want to improve it. So we already have some kind of content. And what we're going to do is we're going to wrap that content in a better structure or modernize it or something like that. So it's not a brand new project. It's something that we're evolving. Okay. And so this is an idea that you can't do anything to make it really cool unless you have the basic structure. And the basic structure to me is there's 3 layers. So if I'm going to test you on this kind of stuff at all, like from a theory perspective, the 3 layers I'm going to ask you about are structure, presentation, and behavior. Those are the 3 layers. So how does this work? So without good structure, and we're talking about HTML, right? Without good structure, I take my content, and what I'm doing is I'm going to be marking it up with HTML, and a lot of times what we want is semantic HTML, which we're going to go into in a bit, what that is, to make it more, kind of lay it out, basically is what we're doing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use our presentation layer through CSS to make it look nice, right? If you don't have those 2 things, then JavaScript is really useless. Well, what do we need JavaScript for if we don't have good content and good HTML and structure and CSS and all that stuff? Those 2 things are more required than anything else these days. So when it comes to basic web design, and not just application development, but just basic content, making the content more interactive or whatever, you need to have those 2 sub-layers first before you get into behavior, because that's what JavaScript gives us, behavior. Okay? So if we think about this, the idea that we want to use HTML, the new way of doing HTML, and this is just a review of what stuff you should know already, we want to use something called semantic HTML. We don't just want to use HTML with div tags anymore. Div tags and all that kind of stuff are not enough. What we want instead is things like this: a header, a nav, a section, an article, and a side. And what that does is it describes our content, especially from things like accessibility for screen readers, and even for us, when we actually look at the HTML page, we want to understand what's actually being kind of discussed with us. Like, I got HTML, it's this, I've got my content, and I'm marking up my HTML or my content with semantic HTML, and it's far better than what it used to be. Okay, so that's really what I really want to talk about. And so we can turn something that looks like this, which is basically, a bunch of div tags, right? And by the way, if you notice in this area here, we have our 5-page site, and I've kind of talked about this before. The typical 5-page site, if you're going to set up a website tomorrow for somebody, it's going to be an index, about us, products, services, contact us, 5 pages, right? And then you might have other sub areas inside your products. Maybe you're going to have, different kinds of products or whatever. But these 5 areas, for the most part, are something that almost every business has in some form or another, right? So here in this first version, you can see that I'm just using div tags. And div tags have no meaning. There's no semantic meaning with div tags. So although they work, a lot of times what we want to do is we want to use semantic tags like header, nav, article, and footer, right? That makes more sense to us. And you know, imagine we're developers. We want to make stuff. If I was going to make HTML with functions somehow, I would want to make it so that the functions are named correctly, contextually, right? Not just div, div, div. What the heck does that mean? It doesn't mean anything, right? So that's what the role of semantic HTML is all about. At the same time, our presentation layer, nowadays what's happened is CSS has become really, really powerful. Back in the day, CSS was very basic. When I first started programming the web, and this is right out of university, the first time I went to university, I remember that there was nothing else but blue links. We had no images at the time. Email was only a university thing. No one had email, right? You can only send email from one university to the other. That's how it was. Yeah. There were no cell phones at all at the time, right? I mean, cell phones had just come out and they were massive blocks. Almost no one could afford them, or they were inside the car, right? And for the most part, home computers was like very rare. One person out of maybe 10 had a home computer, and you didn't do much with them except for maybe doing spreadsheets, and that was it. So the whole game market and consoles, the only thing that we had back then was the Atari 2600, right? That we're talking about, and some other consoles back in the day. But kind of really old stuff, like the Amiga came out. Right? Woo, that was an awesome machine. And if you haven't heard of the Amiga, that's okay, because that's what it was like. IBM was the machine of choice back in the day, PC, right? So that was what we were running. When the web came out, or it was called the internet at the time, right? There was no web. It was just a bunch of links. And I was excited to learn HTML. I said to one of my professors, can I please learn HTML? He says, yeah, I know, it's kind of difficult, he says to me, and because at the time it was, right? And there were no images. But nowadays, you can do all kinds of wonderful things with just CSS, with no JavaScript whatsoever. And there's something I always refer students to, which is the CSS Zen Garden. Take a look at this. So CSS Zen Garden is interesting in that, and one of the challenges is this. You're given a certain set of content, right? And this is using CSS2, my friends, not CSS3, the way we're using it right now. So you're given a certain set of content, and the challenge is spin your content with proper presentation to make it look cool, right? So here's one page as a change. So same content, right? And they've switched it up. It's all CSS, okay? It's all done with CSS, so no JavaScript whatsoever here, okay? And you can see what they've done with just CSS that made the page look really nice, right? And let's take a look at another one. Here's another one, right? CSS Zen Garments, and you can see that there's a bunch of it's the same contents. Here's another one. Here's another one, right? Again, this is just using CSS and marking up your design so that way it looks really interesting. So what I find really interesting with these kinds of things, right, the beauty of CSS design, is you can do so much with CSS. And again, this is just CSS2. Can you imagine what it would be like if you had CSS3? CSS3 gives a lot more functionality built in right out of the box. It can do all kinds of special effects, the same kind of special effects that we would have expected to use with JavaScript. A lot of it can be done with CSS today. So the way we do things is this. First, you mark up your content nicely. Then you do whatever you can with CSS, because it's the fastest way to get good behavior out of your website. Just good clean CSS. And then what we want to add in is JavaScript for additional special effects and other behavior. For example, if I want to create some kind of fancy animation or a mini game inside the browser, a lot of times we'll use JavaScript. Although I have to tell you that CSS can make Doom right out on the browser. I'm talking like full Doom. Yeah, so it's really crazy what CSS can do. It's just that people just don't know how to do it. They don't understand CSS, and I have to say, they don't like CSS. Now, one thing we talked about last week is that this is not a CSS course, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to install to get our stuff working, we're going to install something called Bootstrap. Bootstrap. So if you go to getbootstrap.com, I'm just going to kind of copy this. I'm going to add it into your resources here under week 1. So if you go to week 1, I'm going to add a new URL. And again, for the other people in the first section, they already have this. This is Bootstrap. And this is kind of a CSS framework. There are others. I want to talk about that as well. All right, so here's Bootstrap. One of the other frameworks we can use is something called Foundation, right? So Foundation framework. And the Foundation framework is another front-end CSS framework, right, that makes your CSS look awesome. Both frameworks use something called grid-based kind of alignment, right? And what Bootstrap uses, we're not going to use Foundation, but what Bootstrap uses is something called a 12-column grid, right? So I have a bunch of columns, right? And if I have 12 columns, it's roughly around 8%. Each column represents 8% of the page, right? And then what I want to do is I want to lay out my my content across different columns. And what it allows me to do is have a lot of control with my content. So Bootstrap is successful in that people have created it and they use it everywhere. It's a kind of almost a de facto standard still on the web. There's other ones too. For example, there's flat design that's being used by Android and Google, right? But still, I have to say that Bootstrap is still number 1 when it comes to a front-end framework for CSS. So let's go to the documentation for a second. And if you look at layout, it talks about this. It talks about how Bootstrap uses different kinds of breakpoints, right, to support different browsers. So for example, let's say I have a handheld browser and I want to access a website, right, or a web application. Then what's going to happen is there's going to be different breakpoints depending on how many, what's your resolution or the width of your particular viewport on your machine. It's going to have different breakpoints and it's going to readjust your content based on that breakpoint. Okay, so this is using something called media queries, right? And the way Bootstrap handles it is with several classes. One of the classes is called container. Okay, so we're going to talk about Bootstrap really quickly because for the remainder of the semester, I'm going to be using Bootstrap as a front-end CSS framework, so we don't have to worry about CSS. We're going to look like we have superpowers with CSS, although we're not going to actually do any custom CSS ourselves. Okay, so I'm going to get back to this. So first, in order for us to get CSS going, let's go back into VS Code. Now again, for you weren't here yesterday, so you may not be able to do some of this. But if I go into VS Code, last day what we did, and if you want to follow along, you can. What you can do, if you weren't here, is you can go up on GitHub. I've shared my code on GitHub anyway. And what you can go is github.com/Durham Programmer. Okay, so this is where I have lesson 1B, and this is where we're going to be starting, right? So even for you, if somehow it didn't work for you and you wanted to go and re-download this stuff and start from there, it's totally fine. Here's lesson 1B. And if you go there, if you click onto it and you click download, right, you can download a zip file. If you unzip it, you'll have that folder that we're working in today. And as long as you have Visual Studio Code, for the most part, you'll be okay, right? One thing you will have to do a little differently is you're going to have to, you can't do some of the stuff we're going to do with Node.js, but you can always download and install Node.js on your command prompt and you'll be okay. All right, so if you follow the video, you're going to be cool, but this is where we're going to keep most of our code. So if you want to know what I'm doing, you can always look up here because I'm going to update this in a few minutes. All right, so I want to load Bootstrap. I want to kind of include Bootstrap in my website, but I don't want to go up on Bootstrap and download it manually. One thing I could do is I could use something called a CDN. A CDN is the Content Delivery Network. And what that means is Bootstrap, jQuery, and all popular libraries out there for front-end delivery, right? They're being hosted up online right now by Microsoft and Google and Amazon and a bunch of other places, right? Back in the day, we were all skeptical. When I was a web developer back in the day, I was like, yeah, no, content delivery network, no, I want full control of my stuff locally on my machine. And then the problem with that was that, you know, when you're offline, right? Because back in the day, I'm talking not very many, not long ago, maybe 10 years ago, right? I was a little bit wary, skeptical, if you will, about using a CDN when it first came out. And the reason for it is because, you know, the web wasn't as pervasive as it is today. Not everyone had a smartphone. Data cost a lot of money just to use and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, we were like, wait, what if I don't have access? That would be bad, right? So, but nowadays that's not the case. And in fact, CDNs, so the Content Delivery Network, because if you were going to go on a regular website and I don't know, look at the content, so many websites use jQuery and Bootstrap that actually you probably have jQuery and Bootstrap on your machine right now inside your browser. Like it's just there, like as it's cached as a library. So what happens is if you have that already, it makes your page load faster because it's already cached. Okay. Whereas if I only have it local on my machine, and you go up to that website, what you're going to have to do is download my version of the library first before the content loads. So that's a little slower. However, for us, because I want to talk about kind of a full stack development like we talked a little bit about yesterday, right? I want to make sure that you have everything local. So the way to do that using Yarn, and again we talked about installing Yarn yesterday. I'm just going to press clear here. And I'm using, the way I got here again, just a recap, is in Visual Studio Code, VS Code, if you press Control and backtick is just the key next to your escape key, underneath your escape key on the left, Control backtick, right? It kind of brings up your terminal window. So what I want to do is I want to do this. I want to say yarn, are you ready? Are you with me? Init. Again, in order for you to do this, you have to download a node, you have to install Yarn, and then you can do what I'm doing. Yarn init. And what Yarn init is remember we downloaded Yarn. And Yarn is like NPM, Node Package Manager, but it's a little faster and has a few more bells and whistles on it, right? So that's why I like to use it. And what I just did with Yarn init is I'm initializing, Yarn, and what's going to happen is it's going to create something called a package.json file that we're going to use for the entire semester. Think about your package.json file as a manifest that describes all the dependencies for your web application, right? So the first question it asks you a series of questions, almost like a little wizard, and or a batch file. And the first one is, what's the name of your website or your web application? You can't use caps. You have to use all lowercase. So I'm going to just change this to lowercase, WEBD6201 lesson 1B, and then press enter. It's going to ask you the version. I'm going to accept the version as version 1. The description is WEBD6201 kind of lesson 1B example site. That's what it is. My entry point, normally what we want to do is we usually have a JavaScript entry point because a lot of times Yarn is used with Node.js in the back end. For now, it says index.js. We don't have that, but we're going to just press enter. It's going to ask me for my repository next. Now notice it picked up on my repository. I added a repository, my local Git repository, and it kind of detected the name of my repository. I'm going to accept that as well. The author, just like my repository, when we set up, we configured our author, a username, and all that stuff locally on our system. It picks this up too, so it knows who I am. And then from a license perspective, it's just an MIT license. It's not private, and we press enter. Now what this does is, if you notice on the left-hand side, because the way that VS Code works is it's based on a folder structure, not a project structure like Visual Studio 2017 or 2019. So we directly have access, like I said last day, to the operating system. So this is like literally looking at what we're seeing in a folder, right? Notice it added this new file called package.json. And what is that file? What it is literally something called a JSON file. And JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And what you see here is some curly braces. So we have two curly braces in JSON. And what we have is everything in quotations, right? So it's two strings. The first string in this case denotes the property name. So here's an object. Now, it's not like an object in C# or Java, right? An object in C# or Java is something that's been created by using the new keyword, let's say, right? This is something an object that has been saved to a file. All right, so I've got my properties: name, version, description, main. Think about these as the variables of my object, and then think anything after the colon as the values that are associated with those properties. So, for example, my name, variable name, is WEBD6201 less than 1b, and they're comma separated. So all the values are comma separated. This is a great example of a JSON file. All right, and we're going to see that we're going to use JavaScript object notation throughout the course, data and to actually get data back. Okay. So here, the first thing we do when we did yarn init is we created a package.json, and what it's going to do for us is it's going to track any of our dependencies, and I want this to happen. So when we download Bootstrap, Bootstrap has a dependency jQuery. Okay. So I want to be able to say that when we run our website, I need Bootstrap to make my website look like it's going to look. I need jQuery to empower Bootstrap. And I need something else called popper.js to empower Bootstrap as well. Let's see how this works. So the way it works is, I'm just going to clear the screen. I'm going to use yarn, and the command is this: yarn add, and then the name of the library, in our case, jQuery. And then press enter. It's going to go out, grab jQuery, and pluck it right into my web application. Take a look. And it's going to store it inside of a new folder called Node Modules. So inside Node Modules now, this just downloaded, I've got jQuery. Done, the latest version. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to go up online and check it and click download and drag and drop and unzip it. None of that. It does it all for me, just like any other package manager. Let's do the next one, right? So clear. I want to yarn add popper.js and press enter. It's going to grab popper.js. Let's do the next one. Yarn add bootstrap, right? Bootstrap, and then press enter. It's going to grab bootstrap. That's good to go. So I've got bootstrap, jQuery, and popper.js. 2 seconds. That's how fast it is. Now, if you look at the package.json, it's added a new property and a sub document right here, right? Which is basically saying, hey, my dependencies, there's an object of dependencies. I've got Bootstrap, jQuery, and popper.js, and these are the minimum versions that I want for those 3 libraries whenever I run my application. So if I pass my application to you and I don't have Node modules downloaded, right now I have my Node modules downloaded. And if you notice in my Node modules, I have these libraries, but let's suppose I don't have these. If I erase this file, like just delete it. Don't do this, but I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to put it to the recycle bin right now, right? And I need these 3 dependencies to run. With yarn, I could literally do the following. I can say yarn install. And what this will do is it'll go down, fetch all the libraries, and install them back into my application based on the descriptions that I put inside of my package.json. By the way, the .NET framework works very similar to that now too, with its own package manager. So notice now I'm back at Node modules. I still have everything. It's all back here. So that's how I can get stuff. So that's Bootstrap and jQuery. And just to go to jQuery for a second. So jQuery, we're going to learn that later on. We talked about that. jQuery is an older library. It used to be totally necessary for us to download and install jQuery because it made coding JavaScript easier. But nowadays, with the evolution of JavaScript with ECMAScript 6 and beyond, jQuery has become less and less relevant, right? jQuery also had other projects. For example, there was jQuery user interface, jQuery UI, right? And there was also jQuery mobile, right, which was actually a mobile compatible framework. Like it says, a touch optimized framework, but I'm pretty sure jQuery mobile hasn't been updated for a while with anything decent. It used to support all kinds of phones. This was an awesome framework back in the day before we had React Native, back in the day before we had Ionic and other kinds of frameworks that were JavaScript powered in the front end. So really, some of these projects have become stale over the last little while. But jQuery is still useful for us when it comes to rapid development. And especially if you're a non-programmer, if you're an artist or a designer, then maybe you don't want to learn JavaScript, and jQuery is everywhere, right? One thing to note also is that jQuery and JavaScript are well supported on W3 schools. So if you ever go and want to learn something, you can go to W3 Schools, right? And in W3 Schools, you'll see that whatever I want to learn when it comes to JavaScript, jQuery, React, AngularJS, all kinds of stuff is all here, and it's all free from a learning perspective, even Python and C++. Okay, so really, really cool stuff. And they keep on adding stuff on W3 Schools, which always makes me really happy. When I see like W3 Schools increasing their stuff for free, to me it's like free training is always awesome. And look, they even have Bootstrap. So if you look at Bootstrap, it talks about what Bootstrap you want to learn. We're going to be learning Bootstrap 4, and it'll talk about how to make everything work with Bootstrap. It also goes to Bootstrap Getting Started, which is really cool. So I'm going to take this. If you don't have, I'm sure you know W3 Schools, because for now we should know. But we're going to go in and use this once in a while to help us create stuff. So we're going to get back to this. I'm just going to close this off for now. One thing also with my 5-page site, I want to make a 5-page site today, right? One thing with my 5-page site is I want some really cool icon fonts. Like we see a lot of these sites nowadays, they have like these little icons, like a home icon and all this other stuff. Well, the really great thing about this is some really great frameworks for that, and one of them is called Font Awesome. So let's go and look at Font Awesome for a second. Font Awesome gives you an amazing amount of icons, and a lot of them are free. Take a look. So for example, I want, let's say, a home icon, right? And you can see that it's going to give me a little home, right? And this icon font is much lower from a footprint perspective and loading than an image, because it's been created. So if I can actually click on here, you notice it's a vector graphic. Take a look. See? It's using vector graphics, and what it does is it's scalable. So I can use my icon font and I can put it across different devices with different screen sizes, and it's going to scale to fit that particular device. Okay? So I want Font Awesome. This is something I would like, right? There's two versions of Font Awesome, the free version and the paid version, right? So there's a couple things I could do. I could go, and I did this a little differently on the last class with the previous section, other than you guys. I could go down here and just use Yarn to add Font Awesome. But there's another project called Fort Awesome, which gives us all the fonts. And to see that, if I want to go to Fort Awesome, right? .github.io, you can see that Fort Awesome is this site, right? And if I want to look at Yarn and Fort Awesome, you can see the command for that. So if I want to use Yarn and Font Awesome as an example, it tells me how to get everything. And you can see that this is what I want at Fort Awesome, right? Dash Font Awesome. That's how it is. So I want to get all the, so if I want to say Yarn add at Fort Awesome, and then Font Awesome free, this is the one I want. And you can see it gives us the way to add this in. Now notice it says -- dev. Yarn actually allows us to do two things. I can save my dependency that I'm downloading as a development dependency, or I can save it as a regular dependency. Okay? So what I want is this part, at Fort Awesome / Font Awesome free, and this is what I'm looking to get. Okay, so copying this one, I'm going to go back down to VS Code, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to just paste by right-clicking. And what I want is I want to go back to this and go Yarn add at Fort Awesome -- Font Awesome free, and press enter. And what this does is it grabs Font Awesome for me, right? And it plops it again back into Node module. So there it is, Fort Awesome. So Font Awesome is actually a CSS framework. And you can see that there's one called all.min.css, and that's the one I want to use. Okay? So we're going to get this later on. Okay, cool. So I've downloaded stuff. I've got my dependencies. And notice that all the dependencies happen in alphabetical order. This is a good thing, right? But I want to add this to my HTML page. So first of all, what I need to do in my index.html, this is my index.html right now, is I want to replace this hello world stuff with a nice navbar we can get from Bootstrap. So I'm going to delete this. I'm going to go up online and go to Bootstrap. And on the left, you can see that there's a components. So I'm in documentation, and then I'm clicking on components. And if I scroll down, there's something called navbar. And if I go to navbar, it actually gives me an example of a big navbar that looks like this. So I want this navbar, but I want to put like home, about, product, services, contact us. I want to have that in there, right? So I can copy this thing by clicking this copy button right here. And then I can go back to VS Code and then just paste it. Okay? Now remember what I did when if I want to run this thing, I want to run it more interactively, and I can use that thing that we downloaded last time, which is light server, right? And if I do control backtick, I can enable that, light dash server. And what this is going to do is it's going to pull up this. Notice what happens. I got like these blue links. The reason why I got these blue links is because we haven't installed Bootstrap, jQuery, or any of that stuff. So let's do that now. So one thing I want you to see is this. The reason why I brought this up is I want to work side by side with my browser and VS Code. And so you can see the difference. When I'm working here live, right? I'm working here live. And what I want to do is I want to see when I make changes, I want to see what happens here. I don't have to refresh the browser when I've got browser sync on. And what Light Server does, like we talked about last day, it's a little module that I downloaded with Node and NPM that runs on your command prompt, that is a little Node server that automatically checks for any changes in your code and updates your browser when we have a change. Okay, so remember that I want to add the style sheets that I want. I'm just going to maximize this so you can see everything. So we know that the style sheet we can get with link, and we're going to use that shortcut link. Notice that I get a bunch of shortcuts through Emmet in VS Code, like we talked about last day, and press tab. It's going to give me this stuff. I didn't type it, it just came with it. And here's how you do it. /node modules, because that's where everything lives now that we downloaded, right? /bootstrap /dist /css /bootstrap.main.css. So the minified version of the CSS file, which is what we want. So that right here, node modules, bootstrap, dist for distribution, CSS for CSS, bootstrap.main.css is the one that we want. Are you with me? Cool. Now what I want is I want to do the same thing with font awesome. So again, link, CSS, right? And again, just like before, I'm just going to go /node modules, and this time it's going to be Fort Awesome free, right? And then CSS, and I want all.min.css. All means all the icon fonts. That's what I want. Okay. So notice I'm putting these two style sheets before my custom style sheet. And the reason for this is because of the cascade. The way it works is it goes from a specificity perspective. So I start with Bootstrap, I have Font Awesome, and then I have my own custom style sheet, which means my custom style sheet can replace the styles that have been developed in Bootstrap and Font Awesome if I want to. If I did it the other way around, Bootstrap and Font Awesome would override my custom style sheet, which is useless, right? Now that I have this, and I'm not quite done the install yet, I want to go down to where I have my script, which is around, in my case, line 49. And before my script, you can put some comments on the page, right? The comments will look like this. HTML comments kind of look like this, right? And what I want to put is the comment for my third-party libraries. Here's my third-party libraries, right? And in here, I want to use scripts instead of links. So again, a script, source. And then what I want to do is /node modules. The first one is jQuery, and then dist, and then jQuery.min.js. So that gives me the dependency for Bootstrap. Bootstrap cannot work without jQuery, right? So I get jQuery first. Then let's get Bootstrap. So script, source, right? /node modules, and then Bootstrap, and then dist, and then JS, bootstrap.min.js. And there we go. There we have it. Now we have everything. Now if I save and I go back to my page, you can see that I got navbar. It's all been fixed. And if I maximize this one, you can see that I have my links here. Notice what happened. When I have a smaller page, I get the hamburger. This little hamburger, which basically gives me like a mobile compatible website automatically. And that's what Bootstrap does for us, which is awesome, right? If you're going to provide something for your customers, I want to do it like this. I'm not going to do this from scratch. I'm not going to do it with my own JavaScript. I'm going to do it through Bootstrap, and it's a CSS framework. Remember the 3 layers: structure, presentation, and behavior. And we're going to use structure and presentation first. All right, so cool. We have our navbar, but it's not quite what we want. If you notice, we don't have the right links. We have a home link, some kind of weird drop down, and this search bar. I want to customize my navbar so it doesn't have the search bar. I can take all this, move it to the right side, and I want to change my navbar to the name of our course and what we're doing today, right? And you might see that actually it'll take like 2 minutes with Bootstrap. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So back to Bootstrap. So here's our navbar, and if you look at our navbar, the structure, without knowing anything, you can see that the navbar brand, which is the thing that's on the left-hand side, you can actually put an image in there. So if I had my own custom logo or whatever, I just kind of put it right in here. But for now, we don't have a logo. I'm just going to change this navbar brand to WEBD6201 and then lesson 1B, because you guys are the B team, right? And then what I want to do is, as I scroll down, you can notice that my navbar has something called MR Auto. I want to change this to ML Auto, which is going to shift my links to the right side from the left side. If I save it and go back, you can see now that I've got my lesson 1B and my links are on the right side. Okay? I want my navbar to be black. I don't like it white like this. It's too washed out. So let's see if we can do that. So the way to do that is go back to around where it says the div tag, and you can see that up where the nav is first established, you can see it says navbar light, background light. Let's change it to navbar dark, background dark. And if I press save and I go back, you can see now I have a black bar, right? Nice and cool and very quick, right? So I've done those changes, and I want to go scroll down, and I want to get rid of a couple things. One is, you can see that I've got my nav item drop down. I don't need that. Remember, I want to get rid of this. I'm just going to go here and just delete it. No more nav item drop down. I also don't want this disabled link. I don't need that disabled link. Let's get rid of that too. My disabled link now is gone. And I also don't care about this form. This form makes no sense to me. I'm not going to search for anything right now on my website. Let's get rid of that. All right, so I've got rid of those things. Let's just take the spaces away so they look nice. All right, and then I'm going to save. And now let's see what I got. Oh, I got this. Home and link. We're almost there. I need home, about, products, services, and contact. How do I do that? I can literally just copy this link. First of all, let's get rid of this span. I don't need this span for now. Oops. This span. I do need this link, but let's change this to about. We'll say about us. And I'll take this list item right here, copy and paste. And let's make it a little bit, we can make this all happen in one line like this. Let's just do a little bit of crafting so we can make this a little bit more kind of compact, compressed. So we can do this. Right? And I can take this about us link and I can copy it and paste it 3 more times. And then we can change the about us to products. Oh. We can change this one to services. And we can change the last one to contact us. Okay, cool. And if I save it now, and if I go back, you can see that I've got home, about us, products, services, and contact us. Looks pretty good, right? And if I minify, in my little hamburger, it says the same thing. This is the hamburger right here. Okay, but remember we talked about this? I just downloaded and installed Font Awesome. I want some really cool icon fonts to go along. How do I do that? Well, let's take a look at Font Awesome. So I'm going to go back to Font Awesome. And like I said before, I want this home font. And notice right here when I go into the icon font, so if I go to my icons up here and I want to search for something, let's say I want to search for home, you can see that I have different homes. Here's one, right? I want to get this one. So if I click on this home, and I can go here, and you can see that I've got some code in here. It's hard to see, but if I click onto it, I copy the HTML. And if I go back and put that link just before the home link, Control V, you can see that, and I make sure also, be careful, make sure there's a space between the I tag and the text, like this. Right? And if I save that and go back to the website, you can see that I have my little home right there. Bang. And it looks really, really good. It's an icon font, right? Okay, I need something for About Us. I need something for products, services, and contact us. For About Us, maybe what we want to do is like the info button that looks like an info. So let's go back and see what we can find on Font Awesome. So I want info. There we go. And you can see that I have a couple of options, these two options. The ones that are grayed out, if I want to get them, I have to go pro. See, these are the pro fonts, right? And I'm not going to do that here. So I'm just going to grab this info circle. And then as I click onto it, I'm going to click on this HTML, copy HTML. I'm going to go back to this and then plop it in just before the About Us. And then press space to give us a little bit of space between the icon and the text. And when I go back, you can see now that I have a little About Us link. Looks nice, right? I want to find something for products, something for services, and these are more difficult. From a products perspective, maybe I want some kind of grid. There's not really a products that I've searched for before. Like whenever I search for products, it doesn't really appear as a font. I mean, you'd have to have your designer in the real world make your own little font, right? But for now, if I search for product, well, product, I mean, really, there's just this, product hunt. That's not really cool. And I can say something like, maybe my products is like a grid, you know, a grid of stuff. And you can see that there's a lot of different kinds of grids, right? As an example, there's also some other kinds of emojis and stuff like that that come up. But maybe what I really want is just something simple like this. So some kind of grid that shows me a bunch of different products. Okay, and then you can think about other things, like maybe if your product was, if you're a restaurant, maybe you'd have a menu, right? And that might work as well. So let's say, for example, I wanted a menu. I could just type in menu here. And there might be something that looks pretty good, maybe, right? Like some kind of menu or a map. If I said map, right? Maybe there's going to be something like a map of stuff here, like something like this. It looks like maybe a foldable menu or something like that. So that might be bad, might not be bad. So I click on this map. And if I go in here and I can click on this, copy HTML. I know I did this differently on the first section, but it's okay. Go back, and then before products, I'm going to kind of paste that and space it. And then let's test it to see if it works. Just like before, I have my little map. Looks pretty good, right? You can see where I'm going with this. I mean, now for services, if I go service, I might have a little bell, right? So this little bell here for service. Hey, I want some service, right? So I click on this little service. It's called concierge bell. I'm just going to grab that as well. Go back to here and plop it in. Give me a space. Save it. Go back out. Check it. And then you can see now I have my concierge bell, right? And finally, contact us. I use a little phone, right? Some kind of contact device, right? So go back here. Go back. And maybe I'll put in a phone. Right? And you can see when I do that, there's several different kinds of phones here. One of them is like this mobile phone, right? And I like the mobile phone better than these ones because you don't use like landlines anymore, right? No one has a landline. And when they do, it's kind of completely unused. So let's just go back and just grab that mobile phone, this one here, Mobile Alt. I want to use that one. And I want to grab that, copy it, and then go back to my website and just copy it, paste it in, and give a space. So all these have spaces, that's the rule. When I go back to my website, you can see now that I have everything that I want. Good thing about this is when I minify it, in the hamburger, they come up as well, like this. All right? Really quick and easy, and it makes it look really good from nowhere. Guys, I did not do one piece of CSS, and I'm already starting to make my site look better, right? Simply by doing this. All right, questions around Bootstrap so far, font awesome. I'm just using a CSS framework, and that's what we're going to do this semester. All right, we still want to do kind of a hello world, and we can do that with Bootstrap. So if I go back up to Bootstrap, there's other components here. There's something called a Jumbotron, which is very popular to use. If I go to Jumbotron for Bootstrap, I can do hello world, just like it says right here, right? Jumbotron is a component. And if I scroll down, you can see that they have an example. I'm just going to copy this Jumbotron and go back and underneath my navbar. So I have my navbar, and again, you can do some comments. So on top of the navbar, I can say, well, this is my main navigation, right? And then underneath my navbar and before my main libraries, I can say that, this is kind of my main content, right? So I can paste it in. You can see that there's a div tag, but I think it might be best if I put it in a content tag. Instead of a div tag, let's move this into something called main. So I can actually change this by just overwriting div like this. And it'll actually rewrite something that looks down here, main. And it looks like, and if you actually kind of hover over it, so the main element represents the main content of the body of the document. So we're still being semantically correct. That's which is what we want to do here. Okay? I'm going to save this, and it says hello world. I don't need the lead. I don't need my for typography and stuff like this. I do need the paragraph tag because we're going to add some stuff. Right now, I don't need the button, so I'm going to get rid of this. Going to get rid of the horizontal rule. Maybe we'll keep the horizontal rule, but this one here we got to get rid of. I don't care about this. And this one will be hello world, and we'll say welcome to WEBD6201 client side scripting, right? Save. And if I go back, you can see what it looks like. It looks like this now. Again, it took zero work for me. Okay? And one thing to note is it's taking up the entire page. I don't want that. I want this inside of a div tag, inside of a column, inside of a row, inside of a container. I want all that, right? Remember how we're going to do this? We're going to do it with shortcuts using Emmet, right? So the way we're going to do it is main, right, is cool, but I want to put main inside of my structure. So my structure looks like this. Div with a class of, that's how you do class, div with a class of container. Inside the div with the class of container, I want to put a div with a class of row. Inside the div with the class of row, I want to put a div with a class of column. Right? And then press tab. Writes it all for me. Yeah, I know. It's something you guys should have learned when you were doing HTML. You would have made your teacher mad, right? Then I can take this main, if I want, cut it out, and put it inside here. And when I do this, here's main, and I come back out, you can see now it's perfectly formatted in this way, right? And so when I go back to this, from a mobile application perspective, it looks pretty cool. Right? Again, it took 2 seconds, quick hit, and we did everything good. Are you with me? Yes? All right, so that's cool. I like that. But this course is not a CSS course, like I said, nor is it a Bootstrap course. This course is about JavaScript. And what we want to talk about today is a little bit of DOM manipulation. So what is the DOM? Again, you guys should know a little bit about the DOM if you've done HTML. The DOM stands for the Document Object Model. The document is actually these nodes. So it starts off with the HTML node. Think about the node as the top level, right? The HTML is the container that contains other nodes, right? So it contains two nodes. It contains the head and it contains the body. The head and the body are siblings. They're on the same level, right? So they're sibling nodes. The HTML node is the parent node, okay? And if we go down into the body, as an example, the body has several child nodes. It has the nav node, that's a node, right? It has, underneath the nav node, you can see inside the nav node, there's an anchor tag. That's another node that's inside. It's a child of the nav tag. And inside the nav node as well, and next to the anchor node, there's also a button node. See, so there's one thing inside of another thing, inside of another thing. That is the document object model. Now, what about if I want to get access to this H1 tag? So there's a couple ways I can do this. I can search for an H1 tag inside my document. I can do that, right? Or I can identify this specific H1 tag, right, with an ID, right? Right now, this H1 tag only has a class, and the class display-4 is part of the Bootstrap framework, right? So what I can do is I can add an ID. And by the way, when it comes to CSS and even JavaScript, the way we do it is like this. If I want to affect one object, I can use an ID. I can hook into that object. I want to create a reference to a node that's online somehow. I need to create a reference somehow. And when I mean a reference, I want you to think C++ for a second. Think about it as a pointer. I want to get a pointer. I want to point to or connect with, bind to any of these nodes online. And the way to do that is to create some kind of connection with the node. But first we need to identify it. So I'm going to go over here to my H1 tag and put in, right? So an ID, right? And my ID, because I can have both a class and an ID, right? And my ID is going to be like first heading. Okay, that's my ID. So I've identified this H1 tag as having an attribute of first heading as an ID and using a class of display-4 and also having text content of hello world. Okay? Cool. Let's go back now to my JavaScript. So going back to JavaScript, and if I go to my scripts folder, and when I have my app.js, last day I described this, and this. And this, my friends, is called an IFI, like we talked about before, an immediately invoked function expression, which I also want you to think about as an anonymous, self-executing function. That's what it is. And it's a wrapper, it's a container that contains all of my other code. This is what's inside of that code. And I use it because if I include an IFI around my JavaScript, it automatically executes when it's connected to my index.html. That's why. It solves some problems for us. And it encapsulates all of our variables, so they're inside of a container. They're not running wild in the global namespace. Okay? So that's what it does. So that's pretty cool. I like that. But what I want to do is I want to latch onto that ID. And we're going to use the document model to do that. So first, when we declare variables in JavaScript, you're going to see online that they use the keyword var. Don't use that in this course. Var is the old way of doing variables. And what var does is it allows the variables to be hoisted. Okay, hoisting. Let's explain hoisting a little bit. So imagine to explain hoisting, imagine in Java, if I declare a variable down on the bottom of a Java class, right, what happens? Actually gets redeclared, it gets moved after the compilation process, it moves it to the top. Same thing with a function. If I declare a method in Java and I call the method before it's been declared, it's going to work, right? Not so in C++. In C++, you need to forward declare something, or you need to do it in method order, function order, right? Guess what? In JavaScript, it kind of works the same way when it comes to hoisting, but it's bad for variables. So when I use the var keyword, when the browser interprets my JavaScript, it actually physically moves that variable to the top. Guys, that's a bad thing. I never want that to happen. So nowadays with ECMAScript 6, the latest version of JavaScript, we can use let, which does not allow hoisting. So if I want my variable to be declared right in this space, I can use the let keyword. Let's suppose I want to say let first heading equal to, I want to get a reference to that heading. I can use the document model, so I can call document, that is the object I'm looking for, document, dot, and then there's a couple of methods. One is get element by ID. We have an ID, and all we have to do, and if you notice it gives me code hinting here in Visual Studio Code, I need a string that represents the element ID, which we know what it is. It's first heading. First heading. And we're gonna end this, all JavaScript lines, although it's not required, should be completed with a semicolon. It's a C-influenced language, and just like all C-influenced language, a couple things we have to know. JavaScript is case sensitive, okay? When we separate it with a semicolon, that denotes that that particular command is completed, just like any other C-influenced language. You already know how to do for loops, because they're the exact same as in Java and in C# and in C++. You already know how to do while loops. You already know how to do if statements. Those are all the same things. There's no differences between that and JavaScript. It's the same. However, I want to also mention that JavaScript is loosely typed, which means if I declare a variable of first heading and I attach it to document.getElementById, right? Right now, if I hover over first heading, it's going to say, guess what? My first heading is an HTML element because I'm getting a reference from my document and it's going to be stored inside a first heading, and we're using implicit casting basically to assign a data type to first heading of HTML element. However, if on the next line I make HTML element equal to a string, now it's a string. On the next line, if I make it equal to a number, now it's a number. And this is where programmers go a little crazy, because if JavaScript allows that, programmers hate that. They want strict typing. Okay? However, some people who love JavaScript also love its flexibility, right? I'm not one of those people. I'm one of those people who likes structure, right? And for me, structure is better in many cases than flexibility for me. If I need to use flexibility in JavaScript, it's the last resort. It means that I've given up. I want to solve a problem and I can't figure out how to do it, and I just let JavaScript do the JavaScript thing, which is be flexible. I don't want loosely typed. I want, whenever I declare a variable, it's going to have the same type, because that's what I'm used to doing as a developer. And there's other tooling sets we're going to use later on in this course. One of them is called TypeScript, which is a very important thing to learn, skill, more than jQuery, by the way, right? Because if you learn how to use TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript, you can use React, you can use Angular, you can use Vue, you can use all kinds of stuff. I've programmed entire games with JavaScript and TypeScript with web, right? So, but going back to this, what we have is this, right? Let first heading, right? You can see that it's an HTML, but it's grayed out. It's grayed out because I'm not using it. I've declared it, I've made a reference to it, but now I need to do something with it. And I can do something with it on the next line. Here's how I can do it. First heading, dot, and then I want to call text content. Text content is the thing I want to change. I want to change the text content, the stuff that's inside the node that I've attached to, right? And I want to rename this to Goodbye Cruel World instead of Hello World. Okay? And then I want to end it with a semicolon. And if I do this, save it, and go back, you can see that immediately it says Goodbye Cruel World. So I've used JavaScript to tap into the DOM, document object model, look at that particular node, and swap out the text content with my own. Remember what I said earlier, this week. I said that JavaScript can be used to do CSS too. I can style my node if I really want to, right? I can do all kinds of stuff, but I want to leave all the heavy lifting when it comes to styling and presentation to CSS, because it's way easier to do that. If I was going to restyle my entire page with JavaScript, I might have this many lines of code, right? And with CSS, it might be only this big, and much faster, by the way, right? So again, we want to look at the layers: structure, presentation, and behavior. So going back to this, now that I have this goodbye cruel world, how does it look when it's minified? Well, it kind of looks okay, right? Again, you can see that I have my links here, and we're all good to go. Okay. So questions around what I did. Again, first I access the document model. That's what this is, the document class. Then I used getElementById, first heading. And then I changed first heading's text content to something else. By the way, I could write this all in one line. I want to show you how I can do that, right? So if I go to edit, you can toggle a block comment, right? And by the way, toggle block comment is Shift-Alt-A. So if I go here and go Shift-Alt-A, like this, Shift-Alt-A, you can see that, no, that's bad. Shift-Alt-A, you can see that I can toggle a comment, a block comment on and off with VS Code. I want to toggle it off for now, all right? And I want to rewrite this statement in one line. And the way I can do this is just by using the document object model up to there. And this is the flexibility of JavaScript. And then I can say that, then I can say that dot, you can see that I can do it right here, text content. So with object chaining, I can use text content, and I can say that that is equal to goodbye cruel world, and I don't need a variable in this way at all. And there's no variable necessary. I just connect, and I do something, right? The only reason why I would want to have a variable like this is if I want to do something with the variable later. I want to do additional things, right? But again, I can just like literally, do a bunch of stuff in a row. If I save this and go back, you're going to see the same effect. No difference, right? So this is another way of doing the same thing. Okay. I want to also talk about other things I can do with first heading. So I'm going to comment this one out, and I want to uncomment this one because I want to use this way for now. So again, Shift-Alt-A, which basically uncomments this part. So this is the other way that I did it. Save it. I'm going to leave this comment in here because this is the alternate way of doing the same thing. Okay. What else can I do with first heading? First heading now, I have a reference to an HTML element. Anything that I can do with an HTML element, I have access to with the dot accessor method. So first heading, dot, and I can do things like text content style. This is where I can change the style. And there's a difference between text content and inner HTML. How do I describe inner HTML to you? It's like if I want to add additional nodes. I can use inner HTML, and I can write a node description in there, like for example an anchor tag, and it'll actually make it active inside my page immediately. So I can inject stuff as inner HTML, right? Text content and inner HTML, very similar but slightly different. Text content is just text. Inner HTML actually acts like it's HTML. There's also append child, which adds a child node at the end of a node. It adds it in as a child node, right? I can also set attribute, and set attribute says, okay, so for example, I have access to my first heading, and I want to add an attribute. For example, I want to change the class to something else, right? Instead of my class being display 4, I want to change my display 4 to something else. I can replace it. And there's many other things that I can do in here, right? If you scroll down, you can see that there are a ton of things that I can do, right? I can change the class name. There's the same thing. I can change the class name to something else, right? Let's see what else that is a common thing to do. I can get an attribute. If I want to read an attribute that that particular node has, I can read it in. I want to read the attribute of whatever it is and do something with it. I can also check to see if it has an attribute. does this have an attribute that is this? For example, does it have a class? If it does, I can use an if statement. If this thing has attribute, then do this, right? I can do that. I can also check for its ID. I can also make it hidden or viewable. I can make it so it doesn't display anymore. And there's a bunch of other things that I can do that we're going to kind of explore some of this stuff over the semester by accessing get element by ID. There's also these on functions, on load, on key up, on key down, on focus, and there's also on click. These are all kind of like inline JavaScript. And you know, whenever I see this kind of stuff, I kind of cringe. I don't want to ever use any inline JavaScript like that. I'd rather use something called add event listener. Add event listener gives me way more control. And next week we're going to be talking about events and how to manage events, click events, mouse events, all kinds of stuff, right? Event handling and event listening and what the two things are. Okay, we're going to talk about that next week. So there's a bunch of stuff that we can do once we have access to the element. We have a huge list of things that we can do, pretty much, right? I can also remove childs, right? I can remove the whole thing. I can remove the attribute. I can scroll to it, and so on. Okay, lots of other stuff. And if you notice here, one thing I can do is, if I scroll down to here, first heading does one thing, right? But I can I can append. So notice that what I can do is up here I can say append. So I want to append, and if I press open bracket, it says, what nodes do I want to append? I can actually add to the DOM hierarchy if I want to do this right here. So I can add something inside of my first heading. Now that doesn't make any sense because my heading doesn't really, my H1 tag can't really have subnodes. It only can have text content. But if it was a div tag that I hooked into, then obviously I can add more things. And we're going to do that with some examples, right? But for now, let's change the style. So I want to say first heading, right, dot style, right, dot, and then you can change different things. So I can use something called CSS text. So style.css text. And then CSS text, if you hover over what that is, it says that it's a string. It takes a string. So imagine if I said CSS text for this style is equal to, you know, as an example, bold. Right? So my style, my CSS text is, and again, if I was going to make something bold, how do I do that? How do I make my my something bold? So for example, if I want to go style dot, you know, again, in CSS, I want to change my font width, right? Font width, font height, font weight, right? Here's my font weight, right? And then I can say is equal to bold, right? If I did this and save, and if I go back, you can see now that I've changed the style of my object. Yeah.
Can't you do those things from HTML too?
Through HTML?
Yeah.
Well, you could say strong, right?
That's it.
That's it. But strong is bad. No one uses. In fact, even doing something like this, not really cool unless you want a response. So let's say if I want to do special effects. When I hover over, you know, a piece of text or whatever, it's going to turn bold. By the way, you can do that with CSS as well. That's what I'm saying. Like JavaScript, you got to watch it, right? The JavaScript that I'm showing you right here is something that we used before. We don't do a lot of this anymore, right? We use our front-end frameworks to do all this for us, right? The JavaScript that I want to teach you is the JavaScript that makes this thing a web application. That's a different thing, right? But we're going to get there. First, we got to kind of walk before we can run. All right, so that's what this allows us to do. It allows us to change the style. It allows us to change content. It allows us to add, you know, different elements. So if I want to hook into something else now, challenge for you guys. I want to hook into, I'm going to go back to my index.html page. Here it is, right? I want to hook into this div or this main with the class of Jumbotron, I've got an h1 tag, and I want to append on my main, right? I want to append on my main something else. Maybe an h2 tag, you know, as an example. I want to make an h2 tag appear underneath the p tag. How do I do that? One thing to note is if you ever have a question, you can always go up on W3 Schools, just for a second. And just like it shows you here, if you go to W3 Schools and you go to JavaScript, then you can see that if I want to do DOM manipulation, if you scroll down, I mean, it literally has everything you need to do, or everything you want to learn how to do down here, right? So if I scroll down, here's JavaScript HTML DOM, right? And you can see that these are all the DOM methods. So if I click DOM methods, then you can see that there's that getElement.id thing, right? So that's one that we can use, right? There's the document itself. The document gives us getElement by ID, getElement by tag name. So for example, if I want to target a tag, for example, main, I can get element by tag name. Notice it says elements. What does this return? Well, it returns an array. It returns an array, or a list, if you will, of tag names. Now, if there's only one that's main, it's going to return a list with a size of 1. Okay? And we want to look at the 0th element in that list, which is the first thing. All right? Get elements by class name, right? All the elements by the same class. I can get a list of all those, right? That's one way of doing it as well. I can look at the element attribute and do something. I can set attribute like this. I can remove child. I can append child. I can create an element. And this is what I want to do. I want to create a new element, right? My new element that I want to create, right? If I did this document.createElement, right, it's also going to return a reference to that element later. So what about if I wanted to create an element that's an h2 tag? Okay? Let's try this out. So again, back in JavaScript, I want to target the main element, right? So I want to get the first instance of my element that's main. And the way to do that is if I go back to app. And again, I didn't do that with the other class, but we can do it like this. We can say that let main equal to document dot get elements by tag name, and the tag is going to be main. So that gets all elements by tag name, but we don't want all elements. We want the 0th element, like this. Make sense? Because if I just do this, just from here on, this returns a list. I don't want a list. I want the 0th element. If I go over here now, you can see that it's an HTML element again, right? However, if I take the 0 away, this square bracket 0, I'm going to get a collection of elements. I don't want a collection. I want one. So that's why I'm going to put in the square brackets again. Square bracket 0. Okay? Make sense? So when you see this, I've got my main. I've got access to my main. Now that I know where I'm accessing, I want to add it, I want to create a new element. And I want to reference that element, which is going to be my new h2 tag. So let's do that. Let new h2 is equal to document.create element. And if you notice, it says, what kind of element would you like to create? I want to create an h2 tag. Right? That's what I want to create. And if I do that, and if I kind of hover over here, you can see that I get an HTML heading element. It knows what I'm creating, an h2 tag. Right? Okay, cool. Well, my h2 tag, if I create it right now, it's actually not attached to anything. It's literally just in memory. It's an element that I've created in memory. And I want to attach it as a child of main. Right? That's what I want to do. I want to append that element on top of main. Right? And I also want to style that h2 element too. I want to say h2, display 5. I want to add an attribute, right? So the way to do that is new h2 dot set attribute, and the attribute has two parts, a key value pair. So the attribute that I want to do, right, I want to set the class attribute to display 5. So I'm still in memory. I'm still working in memory here. I haven't added it. I've just changed it to display 5. Okay. And also my new h2 dot text content, I want to say that my text content is going to be kind of a secondary heading, is equal to secondary heading. I don't know what that is. I'm just making it up. All right. So this is where here what I'm doing is I'm describing or configuring my new element. That's what I'm doing. Right? Here, I'm just getting a reference to the parent of that element. Right? But here I'm configuring it. Now, once I have my element configured and I'm good to go, I'm happy with what I have, now I can inject it into the DOM. And the way to do that is I can say that main dot append child, and I'm going to point to the child node, which is going to be now new h2. And when I do this and I press save and go back out to the website, let's see what I get. Secondary heading. Make sense? And it appears, because I'm appending, goes to the bottom of the list. Okay? Now, how does this work? Let's take a look at the code. So if I right click here, remember I can inspect the page. And what I can do is I can actually look at my code. Here's my Jumbotron, here's main. And inside now I have an h1, a horizontal rule, a p tag, and there's that h2 with the class of display 5 and secondary heading. It's exactly what I've done. I've injected that content inside of my DOM. DOM manipulation. Once you have this, I can create anything I want. I can make my page dynamically allocated. I can procedurally generate every element in my page, right, if I really want to, or programmatically generate, if you will. Make sense? At the same time, if I want to delete something, I can remove it as well. Okay, and again, you can always look at some of the elements that I can do. I can create element, I can remove child, I can append child, I can replace child, right? One thing you never, ever, ever, one more ever want to do is document.write. That will destroy your document, like literally wipe it out. Don't do document.write ever. It is like just in case of emergency. That's it. Okay? Questions around DOM manipulation? Guys, that's as far as I want to take it today, right? I think we've done a pretty good job in describing what's happening. One thing we haven't done is put this up on GitHub, right? Remember, I want to share my code with you. So I'm going to go back to this now that I've saved everything. And I want to go over here. Notice that in VS Code is detecting 2,000 changes. Why is it 2,000 changes? Because it's detecting everything inside node modules, right? Now, by default, what node modules does is it has a bunch of libraries in there, right? And normally, I don't put node modules up on GitHub because it's not my stuff. GitHub is reserved for me. I don't have to put it up. Remember? Look, I have my package.json that tells me what my dependencies are. I literally only have to put this up and ignore node modules. And then when I download my app, I can just go yarn, install, and then boom, I have all those things again. I don't have to do it. It just puts it into place, right? But for today, just so we don't confuse anything, because next day we're going to get together and do this all again from scratch, so we can have another set of practice. And next week, like I said, we're going to have a little in-class exercise. I talked about this, right? In-class exercise throughout the entire semester, which are due in week, right, are worth 10% of your final grade overall. And I have a choice of making however many I want. I'm probably going to do something like more than 5. Each one will be something like 1 to 2%. That's what will be done, depending on the difficulty. Usually they'll be very easy. If you just follow along like this could have been an in-class exercise. Hand this in, put it up on GitHub, and put it up on DC Connect, and you're good to go. That's what it would have been. But because, see, and this would be unfair to you because you just registered for the course, that's why I'm not doing it. But next week, it's all fair game because you're here. Homework for you, for the people, and for all the people that weren't here, people who are watching this broadcast right now. is I want you to go do the installation, go through the installation video, the first video, install everything like normal. So next week we're ready to do our in-class exercises. Okay, let's put this up on GitHub. So again, I'm going to go here, click on this little button, and it's going to show me all these 2,000 changes, right? M means modified, U means update. If you notice, there's a little plus button right here. This plus button, when I click on it, is like saying this, git add dot. Git add dot means add everything to the staging area. I want to say that all of these changes are going to be staged so I can upload them to GitHub. Okay, that's first thing. Second thing, I want to add a commit message. Added Bootstrap and oops, font awesome. Right? This commit message is the name of the snapshot that I'm taking. What GitHub does in Git is it takes a snapshot of my current project, right? The way it is. And then I'm going to click this little check mark. And what this little check mark does is it now, notice there's no more changes that haven't been committed, right? And then I can go to the ellipses up here and go push. And what push does is it pushes it up to my GitHub repo on the cloud. And if you've never done this before, it's going to ask you to log in. I've done it before, so it's not going to ask me to log in. And when I'm done, you can see that we're all good to go. If I go up online now, and if I look at this and refresh, you can see that I have 3 commits. And notice now I have node modules up there too. Okay? Let's take a look at these 3 commits. The first commit is the initial one I did yesterday. Then I added git keep so I can have that assets folder. Then today I had one big commit. Typically, I don't do this. Typically, I have a bunch of little commits. Like for example, I could have done a commit when I added in Bootstrap. I could have done another commit when I added in Font Awesome. I could have done another commit when I added in jQuery. Every time I add something or add a feature, I could do a commit, right? But I didn't. I kind of did one big commit. There's a couple of processes, a couple of conventions people use. Typically like this in a coding house. You get out of your seat, before you go to the washroom, make a commit. Because anything can happen, right? Your machine can blow up. You did all your code, you come back and, oh my God, what happened? Your machine started updating. And now, Windows broke your machine, can happen as well. So whenever you leave your machine, when you're ready to go, or close it for the night, make a commit. Don't leave it uncommitted, is the rule, okay? So this is my branch. One thing to note also is that later on this semester, because we're looking at something called the mean stack. Remember we talked about last day, we talked about 3 different stacks. We talked AMP, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. That's a stack, a solution stack. Apache on the back end, that's the server. MySQL as the database. PHP as the scripting language on the back end. And then we have Microsoft stack. By the way, AMP comes in different flavors. LAMP, WAMP, XAMPP, MAMP, right, for Mac, Linux, Windows, right? Different flavors. But there's also the Microsoft solution stack, which is .NET, right? SQL and IIS. Those are the 3 things that Microsoft uses. Internet Information Server, right? And then, so that's the second stack. And then our stack we care about is something called the mean stack, right? The mean stack, right, has these letters, right? These letters all mean something. Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node.js. And it's JavaScript everywhere. Instead of it being, like we said before, last day, we said that, when you use the regular AMP stack, LAMP, WAMP, MAMP, XAMPP, all those kind of variations, right? Apache's got its own language. MySQL's got its own language. PHP's got its own language. Then you have to learn HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. Here, all you have to learn is HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript, those 3. That's it. Everything else is just JavaScript everywhere. Now, if you don't use mean, if you don't use Angular, and all you use is Mongo, Express, and Node, it's the men stack. No disrespect to women, all right? Or if you replace Angular with React, it's the MERN stack. But there's different solution stacks that are all JavaScript, okay? So on this, then, this is what we're going to be producing by the end of semester, the mean stack, or something like it, but without Angular, because Angular is a course of its own. It could have been like, I could do 2 semesters on Angular, just Angular alone. That's how complex it can be. Oh yeah, it's pretty crazy. But one thing to note is we want to host our pages somewhere. And one of the things I'm going to ask you in one of your lab exercises is to host your pages live. And one place you can host your pages live is GitHub pages. If you have a GitHub account, you can host your pages on GitHub pages. And there's an instruction sheet on how to do that. You literally point to your GitHub pages by following these instructions. So there's GitHub pages. And then you can actually host a whole site free on GitHub. Okay? I think it's a good deal. Later on, when we host our Node.js backend, we want to host it on something called Heroku. And what Heroku is a, it's not free, but it's a very low-cost kind of service. It's platform as a service. We can sign up for free, and we can host our Node.js sites up on there as well. I wouldn't recommend the ones that we host up there to be used commercially. You'd have to pay a little bit of money to increase the speed and the bandwidth that it gives you, because they create these little virtual servers that you put up online, right? But for practice and for us as students, it's pretty good, right? We can also use the big three. We can use Microsoft Azure, right? Microsoft Azure is a cloud service by Microsoft, right? And it is rock solid security, right? I mean, maybe as good as the other ones. It's Facebook and AWS. AWS is the other one. AWS, Amazon Web Services. We can host it there as well. It's super powerful, right? If you want to use Amazon. And Amazon is the #1 cloud service in the world right now. And the third one, of course, is Google Platform. Google Platform is also something else. That's another cloud platform that we can use. So Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, Azure, Microsoft Azure, and Heroku are all platform as a service that we can use to host our Node.js and professional websites. Okay? All of them come with a cost. There's also some free services that all of them offer. And if you really want to, there's a local server in Toronto called, very popular. And again, it's called DigitalOcean. Very, very popular, right? It's low cost, virtual environment. Again, it's platform as a service. $5 can give you a virtual server that you can serve up your files. So it gives you a little Linux kind of server that you can set up your Node.js on the back end, right? So lots of options we're going to use. But the one we're going to use, which is going to be free, because I like that word, free, is Heroku. And that's what we're going to use for this semester. So two things we're going to use. GitHub pages coming up. And then later on, in the latter half of semester, Heroku. All right, and that's it. Any questions for you guys on what we talked about today? We talked about DOM. We talked about progressive enhancement. We talked about more JavaScript, right? Bootstrap, font awesome. More stuff when it came to how to use Yarn with VS Code and a lot of stuff. And that's how our classes are going to go. We're going to continue to add and build and add more stuff throughout the entire semester until you guys are JavaScript ninjas. Okay? All right, that's it for me. I will see you all next week, and then we'll decide what to do with our section. Okay? Thanks so much, and I'm going to sign out now. I'm going to go back to this and stop recording.